Chapter 2 of Tractate Moed Katan goes through some further laws on what is and is not permissible on the intermediate days of a holiday. The first Mishnah says, on the intermediate days of a holiday, if someone was running an olive press and had turned over the olives, and he suddenly became a mourner, or some other unavoidable incident came up, or his workers didn't show up, or something along those lines, some say he can load the olives into the press and add the weights and just leave it until after the holiday. Others say you can fully press and barrel the olives for their oil. The Gemara says that by mentioning mourning, it's saying that actions allowed on the intermediate days of a holiday are not allowed during the days of mourning. These points are all further discussed. There are several other things listed which are forbidden on a holiday. Points on worker contracts with non-Jewish individuals are discussed. It says you can't breed animals on these days, nor can you enclose livestock in a field, although if it just walks into the enclosure, that's fine. And there's issues with sheep herding. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says, on Shabbos, you can have non-Jewish people shepherd for you only as a favor. On holidays, you can do it with payment of food, and on the intermediate days of a holiday, you can pay them. That's the law we hold like. New Mishnah. If the same thing that happened by the olive press happened by a wine press, that the wine was already in the collection pit and he suddenly became a mourner, or some other accident occurred, or his workers didn't show up or something, some say he can draw and barrel the wine, others say he should just cover it with a panel so that way it won't sour. The Gemara says it brings this case in addition to the olive press, as the olive press will have a great financial loss if it's not ran, unlike here, so you might have thought that there was a difference between the cases. You would also be able to seal a barrel of beer, which also has a big loss if it goes bad. Also, the laws of the intermediate days of holidays are similar to those of the laws of the Samaritans, in the sense that you cannot make any derivations from these laws. For instance, one sage says you can seal a jug with pitch, but not a barrel, because you can't exert yourself unnecessarily during these days, while another sage says the inverse, that you can seal a barrel, but not a jug, so as to prevent financial loss. Others say the laws of the intermediate days of the holiday are similar to Shabbos, in the sense that some things you're exempt if they're done, while still also being forbidden, while other things are fully permitted. There's definition as to the permissibility of harvesting crops, some saying it's only permissible if it's for the holiday. This is all further qualified at length. New Mishnah. You can bring your fruit inside if you're worried about it being stolen, and you can remove flax from being soaked to prevent it from being damaged. This only applies if this wasn't your plan initially to get it done on these days. The Gemara says to do it so you're not noticed. One sage brought in beams in the middle of the day, but that's because it's a lot more subtle than if you try to do that by night, where you need a lot of people and torches. These points are further discussed. New Mishnah. You may not purchase houses, slaves, or cattle during these days, unless it's for the holiday or for the seller if you need food. The Gemara argues if this means you pay wages on these days for a job prohibited for you to do here if the worker has nothing to eat based on this. We say it's permitted to pay a worker in such a case, and we bring some cases to prove it. This is further debated from several other sources. New Mishnah. You cannot move your possessions on these days from house to house, but you can move them to your courtyard. You cannot bring home utensils from a craftsman, but you can bring them into your courtyard if you're worried about them being stolen. The Gemara says the latter case is still moving stuff from the house to its courtyard. There's discussion in regards to taking utensils to a craftsman, but the sources explain to be talking about Passover Eve, not the intermediate days of a holiday. New Mishnah. On these days you can cover drying figs with straw. Some say you can even condense them. Produce, clothing, and utensils can be sold in private for the holiday, as can fishermen, groat makers, and bean pounders sell their wares in such a manner. Some say they were nevertheless stringent and still didn't. The Gemara debates what condensing the figs means. Some say it means to cover them thickly with straw. Some say it means to compress them into a ball. The points in regards to particular object sales are qualified. For instance, selling fruit is not allowed, as it's done in bulk, and could have been done before the holiday, while selling spices is not and is bought for the actual holiday. And that's the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Tractate Moed Katan further discusses the laws and prohibitions of the intermediate days of select holidays, along with some discussion on the laws of ostracism and mourning. The Gemara says the following can cut their hair on the intermediate days of holidays: someone who comes from overseas, someone released from captivity or prison, someone released from ostracism, someone who had a vow not to take a haircut annulled on this day, and a leper as a part of the purification process. They can also launder their clothes after such situations on these days. You can launder hand towels, barber towels, and body towels too. People with various kinds of ritual impurity can also launder their clothes, but others can't. The Gemara says this is derived from the members of the watch who can't get haircuts or launder, save for on Thursday in honor of Shabbos. This is all done for the same reason as over there. We want to make sure people do these things before the Shabbos and before the holiday. There's debate if you are preoccupied and couldn't get a haircut, if it would be allowed then. Proofs are brought from different cases, but it stands unresolved. Some disagree that you can get a haircut after travel, as there's issues with leaving Israel to travel, where it wouldn't be permitted to get a haircut after. If it was due to financial difficulties, it'd be allowed. If it was to increase your finances, that's worse debated. This is further discussed. Some allow cutting the hair of a newborn if it's bothering the child, as it just came out of a womb. This is discussed along with some qualification on the cases of ostracism and the leper. There's discussion on the laws of an ostracized individual in comparison to a mourner. Discussion if he can wear tefillin, greet others, learn Torah, and similar. It also discusses how this would apply to a leper. These points are further discussed if they can wear shoes, if they can have relations, if they can send offerings, and similar. Points on the laws of ostracism are further discussed. It also goes through and speaks on many relevant verses from Scripture on this topic. It also goes through some particular cases and incidents that warranted ostracism. It also speaks about the great power of ostracism. There was one sage who was being antagonized by a violent individual, and he was afraid to confront him. So he was advised to write a written ostracism, put it in a jug, take it to the cemetery, and blow a shofar over it for a long period, which he did, and the man died. There are further points on these laws described. There are also some additional points, and it speaks on cutting facial hair. Some say you're only allowed to trim your mustache if it gets in the way of food, and it says that the pharaoh by Moshe was a cubit tall, had a beard a cubit long, among other descriptions. Some add that he was also a sorcerer. There's further qualifications on the laws of laundry. It says if you only have one shirt, you can launder it during these days, which is qualified. This is all further discussed. New Mishnah. Documents that can be written in the intermediate days of a holiday are betrothal documents, divorce documents, receipts, wills, gift deeds, the authorization of a court to collect your loan, called a prosbul, letters of valuation and sustenance, the document to cancel a levirate bond from occurring, the document for a girl upon becoming an adult to refuse an assigned marriage, arbitration documents, court rulings, and the correspondence of ruling authorities. The Gemara says a betrothal document is allowed on these days in case someone else betrothed her first. Some say this doesn't refer to the actual betrothal document, rather it's to the dowry stipulation document. These points are further discussed along with some related concepts. New Mishnah. On these days you may not write bills of debt unless the lender doesn't trust the borrower, or the scribe in question has nothing to eat. You may not write tefillin scrolls, a mezuzah, a Torah, or even correct a single letter in any Torah on these days. Some say you can write tefillin or mezuzahs for yourself. You can also spin tzitzis yourself, but without a spindle. The Gemara says you can write and sell tefillin or mezuzahs on these days, as you usually do, to provide for your livelihood. You can spin the tzitzis on your thigh, but there's debate if you can do it on a stone. Some say you can, and you can even use a spindle. New Mishnah. If you bury a relative 3 days before the pilgrimage holidays, the laws of the 7 days of mourning are nullified for him on the holiday. If you buried him 8 days before, the 30 days of mourning are nullified. The holidays interrupt the mourning, besides for Shavuos, which is like Shabbos and does not interrupt the mourning. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur do interrupt them. Some say we actually hold that Shavuos is like the other holidays and interrupts the mourning period, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur actually do not and are like Shabbos. The Gemara lists several opinions as to the level of nullification of the days of mourning. These laws are further qualified, and it goes on a bit further on the laws of mourning by holidays. There's also some select incidents discussed where a sage was informed that his siblings had passed, from which we learned that a mourner removes his shoes, as he did, if he was informed of the unfortunate news from afar. The mourning is only for a day, and that part of a day has the legal status of a day. There's further discussion on these laws. It also goes through some related verses and their teachings. Specifically, a mourner cannot work, bathe, anoint himself, have relations, wear shoes, or read from any listed books of Torah unless the public needs him to teach them. There are some related incidents mentioned in regards to this topic. In regards to tefillin, some say he can't wear them until the 3rd day, others say until the 2nd day, but he should remove them if new people come to console him. They cite verses, and it says we hold like the first opinion, that you don't remove them for consolers, and like the second opinion, that you can wear them from the 2nd day. This is further discussed. It goes through some further laws and discussion on the laws of a mourner. This is all qualified further. There's also points on when and how to tear your garments, brought depending on the relative. And there are other laws like not marrying during this 30-day period, not wearing ironed garments, and further. This goes on for a bit. There are further opinions on these laws listed, and some say that we rule that Shavuos is like Shabbos in regards to not nullifying the days of mourning. It also discusses some unique laws by the mourning and burial of deceased infants or children. New Mishnah. On the intermediate days of a holiday, mourners don't rend their garments or remove their garments from their shoulders. Meals are only provided to close relatives of the deceased, and only if he's in an upright bed and not an overturned one. The Gemara says the point on close relatives doesn't apply if the deceased individual is a Torah scholar, as all Jewish people are considered like his relative. This refers to a non-upright individual. However, if you were there at the time of passing, you'd still be obligated to rend your garments, similar to how you must do that if you see a Torah scroll burned, God forbid. There's a related incident where sages didn't tear their garments for a sage, but were informed that his teachings were said constantly in the study hall, so they did it by the eulogy instead. There are further related incidents by the burials of different sages mentioned. This goes on further. It brings some stories about the events revolving around the passing of certain particular sages and the miraculous things which occurred, like the pillars of Caesarea running with water, the gutters of Tzipori flowing with blood, the stars being visible by day, and several others. There are some rendings of garments that are never mended, from mourning of a father, mother, Torah teacher, the Nasi, the prince, for the president of the court, upon hearing unfortunate tidings, upon hearing God's name be blasphemed, when a Torah scroll has been burnt, and upon seeing the ruins of Judea, Jerusalem, or the temple, where you rend for the temple, and extend the rending for Jerusalem. There are additional points on these, and they bring sources and similar. It also discusses more details on rending, like the size, which is 3 finger breadths, and is extended to any amount, and similar. Others disagree on the amounts. It also discusses opinions on where the rending is done, and this is all for the qualified. There are also points on the laws of overturning beds, how it's done, when, for who, which beds, etc. New Mishnah. The first meal after the burial is only brought to the house of mourning in an ordinary basket. The mourner's blessing is not said on the intermediate holiday days, but people can line up to give consolation, after which the mourner dismisses them. The bier is not put in the streets during these days to not encourage eulogies. This is never done with women out of honor for them. The Gemara says it was instituted that everyone should bring baskets of peeled willow branches to the meal, so that way if it was a poor person, they wouldn't feel bad. They would similarly serve drinks in colored glass, cover the face of the dead, and use a plain bier for the same reason, so that way if it was a poor person, they wouldn't feel bad for being unable to afford better accommodations. They would also put incense under everyone to help those who had intestinal disease to not be embarrassed. They also started immersing all the utensils, so women who were impure from menstruating would not be embarrassed, along with similar concepts. There are further additional laws of burial and mourning discussed. It also brings some verses and says why people die from certain illnesses for certain sins. It also speaks of many times sages prevented the angel of death from taking their souls, temporarily, at least, either as they were eating consecrated food or busy learning Torah, and others. New Mishnah. On the intermediate days of a holiday, women can wail in grief for the deceased, but not clap their hands in mourning. Some allow it if they're close to the bier. On new moons, Hanukkah, and Purim, you can do both of these, but you can't lament. You can't do these after the deceased has been buried by these times. Wailing is defined as one speaking and everyone repeating, based on a verse, but another verse is mentioned, he will destroy death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all these faces. The Gemara qualifies these points and discusses the different mourning customs of some different regions. There are related verses also discussed. It also says that one who departs from the living should say, go in peace, and one who departs from the dead should say, go to peace. It gives some verses as sources for this concept. Based on another verse, it also says, whoever goes from the synagogue to the study hall merits to receive the divine presence. It also says that Torah scholars have no rest, even in the world to come. And that's the end of chapter 3 and the entire tractate Moed Katan.